Okay. How's it? Good evening, everybody, and I want to thank you for joining us. And let me make Greg's head bigger again. Uh,
It's
we,
already big to begin with.
I shrunk you down for the
Oh,
intro.
thanks. It helps my aesthetics a
Uh,
little bit.
anyway, this is going to be part 2 of the Defense Politics Asia Super panel. So we're going to finish up. I queued it up to where we left off last time. I put the stream up for you to see on your end too. So just same as last time. If you want to comment on something, let me know and I will pause it. But
Good.
other than that, let's get into this, and we still have 35 minutes of pain left. So let's go.
2014, all right? But they lost significant military industries that were in the Donbass in the first few weeks of the war. But the question is, why hasn't Ukraine rebuilt their industry of their own? Because essentially, Ukraine wasn't building anything new. They were just revamping everything, and most of their stuff was coming from Russia up until recently. And people don't like to talk about it, but they have a lot of Soviet equipment, but they don't really have the capacity to build new stuff. This is why now they rely on all this NATO equipment. And there's this huge logistical war that, in a way, even Ukraine was not ready for it. They thought they would just fight some war in Donbass, like small scale war, like they were used to. And now, like you said, Scott, in the summer, the Ukrainian army had almost ceased to function. They had to rely on all these weapons and weapon deliveries from the West to survive.
What do you think happens in war there, son?
I know. I was just gonna comment on that.
Uh, Lend-Lease is the program that the United States has compared. I think they've actually used the word Lend-Lease in legislation for Ukraine at this time. The Soviet Union was utterly reliant on Allied Lend-Lease to solve its logistical problems and to equip its tank divisions. They don't like to talk about it, but they had a huge number of M4 Shermans in their army too in this World War II. Like
They did, but not only Shermans. I actually found out for the first time today they had Churchill tanks and Matilda tanks as well. There's a picture in 1943 of Matilda tanks going through Ulica Hrshatik in Kiev, the one of the main streets, and it's the first time I actually saw that. I was pretty amazed today. But
yeah, so like
in regards, can I mention one thing though? In regards to the depletion of Soviet era stocks in Ukraine's army, I think that it is true they're running out, but they still have a substantial amount of it left, especially small arms and various like artillery rounds. The unit that my friend is in, they still are. They don't have a single Western artillery piece, so they're still relying. They've actually been given some of the, I think the D-30s, the old 130 millimeter Soviet howitzers, the ones that the NVA used. So, yeah, I mean, they haven't gone through their entire Soviet arsenal, and Russia also is going through its. They're going through their weapons store, their ammunition supply pretty fast as well. Again, I think it's not as fast as people are saying. It's not as critical, at least from what we're seeing. But I don't know if you saw this week the T-55s.
I did.
Yeah,
I did. I had a good chuckle.
yeah.
Actually, I
So it's
think what they're going to use
things
the
are going
T-55s
well.
for. I think what they're going to use the T-55s for is mobile gun carriages.
I almost think that too, actually.
I cannot possibly see them. Like, I cannot there's not enough reports of partisan activity to justify the deployment of tanks. There
Not at all.
Is it's a short range gun, but it's armored fairly well. And it doesn't particularly matter that it's not that accurate because it's not like the Russians pride themselves in accuracy anyway. So I can totally see them employing these things as artillery pieces at range just while they get their artillery situation sorted.
I'm I'm also thinking, what about like pillboxes as well? For example, I mean, they're not really that well suited for it, but they're making a huge reinforced lines. If you look at the sort of defenses that they've set up in the south, and then also in you know just various parts of the front line. I'm wondering if they're just sort of using those for that. Even I think mobile artillery sounds more
So burying a tank as a pillbox has been a thing. It was a very common thing for Germany to do with excess tanks, particularly any tanks cleared towards the end. They put Panthers underground, probably because the Panthers broke down when they were in operation in World War II. But that might be a thing they're going to do. But in a way, I think that also is kind of an admission of Russia's weakness. Because if they're preparing these permanent positions like that, where they feel inclined to dig a hole and bury a tank up to its turret, they're planning on staying there for a while. Like they don't think they're going to move the line. And they haven't moved the line in any significant fashion all throughout January, February, and now March. So that's still not great for Russia. Even if you're receiving outside weapons and support, that's not really an indication that you're losing a war. Like that's some pretty hardcore cope.
Yeah. It is the thing that some valid points he brings up though are regarding logistics, especially as the new technology like tanks, the Leopard 284s, and various other things come in. That makes things a little bit more difficult. Um, yeah, that's maybe I think the only valid thing he's brought up. Um, that and replenishing, and I don't know if you saw just recently, the EU has sort of set a goal to supply Ukraine with 1 million artillery shells, and by the end of the year, by next year, and I mean that keeps things going, but it's still, there's a lot of difficulties on this end, being Ukraine's industrial supplier, due in large part, I mean, for the fact that we haven't really prepared to fight a war with a peer power in a very long time. Most of what we've been procuring has been due to fights like in Iraq, Afghanistan, things like this, in Syria.
That
Let's continue.
Yeah.
Unless you wanted to say
So I
something.
think the question is also, where did all the money of the arms industry go for Ukraine, for Ukraine itself? You know, they had thousands of tanks. Where has all this gone? I don't know. Why didn't they think
Jesus
of
Christ, can you
doing
stop
their own
real quick?
industry?
It isn't their I mean they Ukraine has a fairly robust arms industry, but when this war started, and actually up until the point where they made this video, a lot of especially their infantry fighting vehicles, like their BMPs, their BTRs, things like that, have been heavily attrited. So, you know, he's trying to, I think, state, that corruption's a cause of the reason why they don't have all of these weapons, but a lot of them are just gone via fighting. They've been damaged, or destroyed, or things like that. So I don't know.
Oh, hang on. We got to stop. Uh,
Yeah.
Something's happening. Hang on a second.
What's happening?
Did you see this? Did it switch over for you? Are you seeing the new part?
Yeah, I'm seeing. Yeah, I knew about him firing the defense minister, but what? Wait, what's going on?
Times of Israel. Let's see what's happening. said to now back overhaul freeze anti-riot police clear out Tel Aviv rally. Cops used water cannon and mounted officers to forcibly remove demonstrators from Alien Highway. Prime Minister said Derry said in favor of halting legislation after mammoth protests. I think I saw the protests were over 600,000.
These are Israelis protesting.
Yes, Israelis protesting Benny Netti's, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name properly tonight. I am tired. Benny Netti's judicial takeover of Israel, which is...
Israel's path is really, really disturbing right now. It's slowly becoming a theocratic dictatorship or something, along those lines, of a right-wing authoritarian country, and that's not really, yeah. I thought, though, when you were searching Israeli news that, they bombed an Iranian reactor or something very, very big.
That'll probably be coming if this continues.
Oh, I know it'll be coming.
Brothers in Arms, a prominent protest group led by reservists, calls for a protest 2 p.m. at the Knesset in Jerusalem.
Knesset, by the way.
There might be a collapse of Netanyahu's blah blah blah. Bleh. I can't pronounce his name tonight. His government.
I really hope so.
I have a feeling there might be a collapse.
Yeah, I really hope so.
Let's move on and keep going, and if something else comes up, we will look at it. I'm going to keep it on in the background. Let's keep going with the smug little history legends here.
There's another big problem in Ukraine is corruption. If you've been hacked by somebody, I treat Ukrainian people with respect. This is not an attack on Ukrainians personally, but every time somebody try to hack me, so somebody from Ukraine, right? So corruption, the level of corruption in Ukraine are legendary. It's probably it's probably undisputed. First 3 places probably in Ukraine, and facts of corruption are already known. So a lot of these weapons that are coming in, a lot of this money that's coming into Ukraine is going to somebody's pocket straight up. Some government official, some military.
That is true. That has been happening, but there has also been an effort by Zelensky's government to crack down on it. He sacked several. I think it was just recently the Minister of Defense, Reznikov. I think he sacked. So there is an effort to fight it. It is very endemic there. I can give you examples. Just even, I think I might have brought it up before, but even at small, like on a small level, like a district center, there were instances where and I was personally affected by this, where me and a few friends, I helped coordinate shipping some like winter clothing from Poland to Priluki in Ukraine. It was mainly done by my friends, but the local government put this in storage. And this was right when the Russians were right outside of the city, right when the terror defense and the territorial defense and the army were sort of, going toe to toe with them periodically outside of the city. And yeah, I mean that exists, and I think it's gonna continue to exist now at a very. It's going to continue to affect the war effort now, and then also long after this is over, Ukraine will deal with it. But even so, I think he's unfairly criticizing Ukraine here, and he's ignoring Russian. They're not mentioning anything about Russia's corruption in their military, and specifically the conflict that is going on in between, you know, the general staff, the Putin's government, and like, you know,
Perotin.
the Wagner PMC.
Yeah. There's something I went back between this part and the first part, and I started reading the articles that Defense Politics Asia is putting out, and it's very clearly heavily Russians favored. So going back and I looked at our first coverage again, and going into this, I see very clearly a system that they've set up here, where Scott is here to completely invalidate any spin story for Ukraine against Ukraine, and then these two get the play off of it. What they're trying to do is they have dismissed any criticism of Russia, and they've turned around and put that criticism back on Ukraine, which is a pretty common propaganda tactic.
Yeah. No, they all lean towards Russia.
The
History Legend certainly does. Sanya, Florida, obviously does. I'm guessing he's Russian. You can even see on his shirt, Chelavint.
Yeah, I'm not entirely certain what his purpose on this panel is. Like,
yeah, and then Defense Politics Asia. I don't know much about his channel. I'm guessing he's Chinese, maybe from PRC. I don't know. Maybe Singapore.
There is some of that. Because there's three major military powers on Asia: is Russia, China, and India, and they're all nominally allied, sort of, kind of. China and India don't necessarily get along that well, but they're all nominally allied through Russia.
Yeah.
The idea, I think, is to counter the concept of unipolarity for the United States. I don't think it's necessarily a well-done job. It's pretty apparent that it's a hack job, but
Yeah.
it's there. So, you know, that's fun. Let's keep going.
They already started killing each other for that. So it's this whole thing is going to be cluster of you know what, like Scott said.
Yeah, corruption. Corruption's the when you're literally one of the most corrupt nations on the planet, and then you're given the gift of over $100 billion in aid with no accounting, no inspector general, no nothing. Just, hey, you guys are pretty corrupt. Here's $100 billion. Do the right thing. Don't be surprised that 70 billion of it has disappeared into pockets. It's crazy.
So the NATO have given is going to give a lot of IFVs, the Bradleys and also of IFV, the tanks. So no, assuming that they are able to bring it into Ukraine, because now they are trying their best to bring it to Ukraine. We do know that there's a lot of problems, like the Abrams tank. It sounds like a scam to make the Germans give up the Leopard, because the Abrams are not going to appear.
No Abrams yet, just the Leopards. They do Leopard 1 and Leopard 2. Leopard 1's like 45 millimeter armor. Hey, good luck with that. You're gonna need it. You're gonna need good luck with that tank on the battlefield.
That's assuming. Are you there? You're just standing there very still? Okay, you're moving. Okay,
No,
good.
I'm definitely there. Yeah.
No, that's assuming that you are able to engage the tank at all, because most Western tanks outrange their Russian counterparts dramatically. Like, I this entire conversation, I bet you any money, is about to get into a serious case of right side insert bucket of Wikipedia articles on vehicles.
Of course, yeah.
And Leopard 2 is a pretty good system, but they just don't have enough of it. They get what, maybe 50 if they're lucky. I mean, they were all promised like 350 or 400 or something. But right now, nations one by one just fall out of this. Oh, we can't give you in the spring, maybe in the summer, maybe never. So they start to just pull out of all these promises.
I mean, you already know my position on you know, tank deliveries and you know how that's not really the, you know, a lot of publicity has been given toward, you know, to this subject, but really what's the game changer for Ukraine, what's going to win it for them, of course, are the IFVs. but more than that, even artillery. Lots and lots of artillery rounds, and skillful use of it. And I'm gonna honestly agree. Like, I'm not agreeing with them, but one thing that it really annoyed me when I was seeing this Release the Leopards campaign and all of this stuff by people, largely people who had no knowledge of military history, of military technology. The Leopard 2A4 is not I mean, it's a good I can't say it's a bad tank. If it's used properly, it can do a lot of damage to Russian forces because many of their tanks are not as good as the Leopard 2A4. But the Leopard 2A4 is also, um, it's an aged system, and it's not. None of this is a game changer. None of this is a Wunderwaffe. And you know, I really, if there's one thing that has annoyed me about this conflict, is it's that thought. Another thing that has annoyed me, and we saw it earlier on this video on last time, was, and this is both sides. This is both people like Scott Ritter, and also people. I'm on the U4U Facebook group, the sponsor. People who are looking for sponsors, and there are so many white middle-aged boomer men. Some not even from the United States, but a lot of them from the United States, who clearly, I don't know why. This is one reason why, one thing about Ukraine and Russia and a lot of these countries with very beautiful Slavic women that bother me. You just have this parade of losers going to these countries looking for wives, and even they have no decency, no dignity. They're just, even on a site like this, and you know what they say? Oh, Vlad, why aren't you fighting for your country? They say these comments, these horrible comments, and like, if I was there, I'd be fighting for my country. And what they don't know about the Ukrainian military is it's not like our military. They have the Ukrainian military, this is something that, after his research trip, the very, very skilled military analyst that I really respect, Michael Kaufman and Rob Lee, said Ukraine is sort of in a transition phase with their military. You have a lot of those old Soviet era officers who are making very poor decisions and are very callous in terms of the lives of their own soldiers. These are in the Ukrainian military, and there's this sort of tendency among people like Ritter and people like these old men to look at this conflict through American eyes, to look at the Ukrainian military like they're looking at ours, like how we conduct our, how our doctrine, our conduct, all of that. And Ukraine is a completely different animal. It's a completely different country, and in some ways they're correct. It's a very corrupt country. Um, it doesn't take away from the you know the it doesn't take away from the fact that I believe that their struggle is the right one. But even so, this tendency to look it through everything with American eyes is just absolutely obnoxious. Let's continue, but I just wanted to say,
Well, I'm going to add a couple things. First of all, that parade of losers is mostly because most American women won't put up with their bullshit anymore.
yeah,
The second thing I'm going to point out is that we looked in the wrong direction for a very long time, I think, about Russia. We should have been looking at this problem back in 2008, I think. And the more and more I think about it now, because like I started paying a very close attention to this. I know you did way before that, but I started paying very close attention to all this in 2014. And I kind of got the impression that anything that you can say about Ukraine, you can turn around and say about Russia at the same time. Like, you sort of have this cultural intertwining that cannot be escaped for their militaries. So even so like you can say yes, Ukraine has a problem where they have ex-Soviet officers who are very callous, but you can definitely say the same thing about Russia, who have built
Oh, absolutely. And you can also
ossuaries
see,
of casualties.
yeah, you can also see that many of the problems that exist in Ukraine's military are even more endemic in Russia's because they haven't gone through any reforms.
And that's the thing that
Reforms, they've gone through reforms, but not,
none of them is stuck.
A lot of these problems are more endemic.
Like you sit and you talk about what's happening here, and like you can run back to the Battle of the Tannenberg Forest and say Russia's military has the same principal problems that they haven't solved in over 100 years.
Of course.
And it's not surprising that Ukraine's army inherited these problems, being so long in the orbit of Russia.
Not just in the orbit, but within, they
Yes.
were for a long time the same country. There's literally nothing separating them. So yeah, of course, Ukraine's going to have these problems. And one thing I might add too, and I've said it before, but I will say it again here, they've also inherited them, both Russia and Ukraine, but Ukraine in a lot of ways that I can see, they have inherited a lot of the successful aspects of Soviet doctrine and strategy. Some of the better methodologies, and I think you have agreed with me on that before, that it's
Yes.
not all one-sided, that some of the some of this doctrine can be useful. It can be usefully applied and can fit certain situations, and Ukraine is rather skilled in that, especially in terms of defense, and in attack too. I thought that their attack in Kharkiv very much resembled like a Soviet sort of mass, and on certain points, like and limited. I don't know what's the name of it. I remember you mentioned it before. Um, it's like deep warfare, I think
Yes.
what it's called, right? Yeah.
Thunder
The
runs
Kharkiv
are a form of deep
operation was an
warfare, yes.
example of that, correct?
Yeah, I would say so. I would also say that the Ukrainians, like, I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, kind of, when we're talking about military doctrine, because there are very clear cases of any country, major country in the last 50 years, executing their doctrines very well. Iraq Desert Storm and land-air warfare worked out very well for the coalition. And the Iraqi army was largely following a Soviet doctrine. So, and the Russians themselves, they execute, they have shown an incredible amount of adaptability in the Second Chechen War, for example. Uh, but I think something to keep in mind is that every time that Russia stops fighting, they have to relearn how to fight again.
Yeah, which is a big problem.
Like 2014.
You'd think of an army with such experience, would learn these lessons. And that's one thing I remember way back in the day. I mean, I'm talking maybe 2 decades ago, I was reading about the Chechen War. And the author of the book, of this study, I don't know, I forget the name, her name, but she wrote about the battles of Grozny. And what she said was that, the Soviets, in their time, fighting in, World War II, in these major city battles, had learned a lot about urban warfare. And when the Russians tried to take Grozny in 1996, or was it 95? I forget. Yeah, 95, I think. Yeah, it was New Year's 94 or Christmas 94. Yeah. Well, they had forgotten all of these essential lessons. It was like they had to relearn everything.
Yes.
And they're relearning a lot of these similar, lessons. Like they learned valuable lessons in the 2008 war with Georgia. They haven't applied them in Ukraine. And in Donbass, even like in the interim period, like they did a lot of incredible, like they had several battles where they won and they didn't learn from them.
Well, even the 2014 takeover of Crimea and moving into the Donbass, they lost largely unopposed. Is what was talked about. They still lost over 6,000 soldiers, 6,000 casualties for not being barely unopposed. Like they stubbed their toes.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's keep going because we gotta finish this before I lose my mind.
So one thing is promises, another thing is what's going to appear on the battlefield. Even if they get the entire several hundred leopards, it's just not enough. And today's battlefield is just not enough to do anything significant because of the development of anti-armor means. So all the anti-armor weapons that the Russians have and even the Ukrainians have made these mass tank attacks no longer feasible. So even if they get tanks, yes, it's going to help them, but to what extent? It's just nobody knows.
So what's the best way to use this force? Let's say assuming that all these force that they was promised was given.
I'm gonna point out that none of these people are probably experts enough to answer this question.
What is the best way for Ukraine to actually use this NATO equipped new offensive force?
The same way they use tanks now, it's just a support vehicle for infantry attacks. It's just support. It's just like they use it as artillery tanks right now because there's so few and they're so vulnerable because in today's battlefield, a tank can be knocked out 3 kilometers away by some operator that the tank crew has no even chance of detecting. So it's not a rock. It's not. It's completely different. The developments in anti-tank means are advanced to the point where large armor formations are no longer feasible at all. So I think it's just support roles. Yeah, mostly infantry goes forward, tanks somewhere sitting behind a few of them and just shooting the points where directed by the UAV, and that's it.
But the tank always had this role. Historically speaking, the tank always had this role.
Not always. No.
No. First of all, I don't see that many evidence of massed armored assaults on either side.
No, and I don't think I honestly
like even interviewing all the OSINT data that I have been looking at, I don't see mass armored assaults in any capacity. You see tanks operating as platoons, like 5 or 4. You don't see them operating en masse in any true sense.
Oh. And I'm wondering, I'm guessing, as this war drags on, if I doubt even we'll see them used in this capacity. I don't think we're going to see a Pokrovka or like any battle like.
Yeah, I'd also want to point out that
1973 between Israel and Egypt, or Syria. I don't think you're going to see that here.
History Legends is completely incorrect. This is not how tanks are operated. You operate a self-propelled gun that way because it doesn't have sufficient armor to directly attack a target. But tanks are not used as support weapons, and describing them as used as support weapons ignores exactly what has been happening in Ukraine, probably to a certain extent on both sides, I think. That tanks are moving into positions and they're not coordinating properly with their supporting infantry, and they're not coordinating properly with the supporting IFVs, so that they're going into a position unprepared. Is it still bad? Cal, let me know. I might have to switch mics.
I can hear you fine.
Yeah, but it might be on the other end of the stream. Hang on. Let's just switch mics. Give me a second. Advanced auto properties. How does that sound now?
Ritter kind of looks like a Frankenstein. Frankenstein's a monster.
He's been hunched over this entire time, and I can't really talk. I do the mean lean on stream.
Yeah, I do too. I'm sure people make fun of me plenty when we stream, but I don't know. I have to take this opportunity to make fun of him because he's very funny looking to me.
Noise suppression and compressor are on. It should be good. You might have to suffer through it, and I will have to do an edit later. Let me know if I get too quiet. I don't like using the condenser for this. So I can't mute it directly. Anyway,
How am I? Am I good?
you should be fine. Because you're coming over Discord, and Discord doesn't really mess up, but I am coming strictly over OBS. No, tanks are not used as support weapons. They're not traditionally used as support weapons. You throw infantry around the tank.
They're used like
they're cavalry. They're just modern cavalry.
And if in the World War II, the tanks were the backbone. You send forward a huge tank formation together with infantry after the artillery.
But that's a myth. That's a myth.
T-34, go.
No, but that's a myth. You needed air support, artillery support.
Yes, of course.
Already back then,
tanks were the deciding factor in the World War II. The tanks were your means of getting through, especially large tank formations, because to knock out a tank, that was pretty hard. There was no way to get an end law or something. You needed to penetrate the frontal armor, and all you had maybe 76 millimeter weapon
guns
that might be
rifles at one point that could penetrate light tanks. You had bazookas.
You had an incredible array of anti-tank weapons in World War II, most of which were 75 millimeters or quarter pounders, anti-tank guns, direct flat trajectory guns that could punch through tank armor. You think the Germans and the British and the Americans built all these little flat trajectory guns for fun?
Same in the.
They're both wrong. And
another example of tech fetishism, though.
Yes.
And you can see that he's fetishizing the shoulder launch anti-tank weapons, or like the tripod anti-tank guided missiles, and really those haven't been the major killer of tanks in Ukraine. They've killed a lot of them, but the major thing has been artillery. And artillery, drones, things like that.
Yeah.
Able to if you see the tank is like 300 meters away or something, then you have a chance. But other than that,
no, I completely.
You have 50 tanks come out. No. It's actually I
don't want to talk too much about it, but the anti-tank weapons like the 88 millimeter flak could destroy a Sherman at 2 kilometers away without even the Sherman knowing about it. So the Germans had excellent anti-tank weapons, and the Americans knew very fast that they couldn't send their tanks forward like that. They noticed it in Tunisia against the Afrika Corps that were elite fighters. The Americans suffered heavily, and then they rethought their strategy. So I wouldn't say that tanks now are. The thing now is just that there's more weapons now, but the tank has always had this supporting role in historically speaking. So the Arabs, the Syrians, when they tried to charge Israelis in the 1960s, 70s, it was the same result. Tanks formations had always this problem of lack of visibility, and infantry could destroy them. Now the thing for Ukraine is that they don't produce the tanks, so they have losses. They can only repair that much, but they can't build new ones. So they need the West.
They have tractors, so they ran off with all the Russian tanks. No. So here's the thing: you don't see mass tank battles. You're also ignoring Kursk, which is like right over the border from the country you're talking about. You have a huge tank battle, a huge tank formation, in which it's the biggest land battle in all of history.
Yeah. The sub-battle in the Kursk operation that you were talking about is Pokrovka.
Yes. Do you
Battle
have
that occurred at that village, and I forget how many tanks were involved, but something I think like 300, 400 on each side.
It was an absolutely massive tank battle.
Yeah.
It was apocalyptic.
Yeah. What I've seen
The Afrika Corps also I'd have to check the range of the 88 millimeter. I don't think it was 2 kilometers away that you could accurately sight. I definitely don't think you can accurately sight a shot 2 kilometers away unassisted in the desert.
No, probably.
So what Rommel did, because Rommel is a well-known tank commander, but the Afrika Corps was a lot more successful in the use of setting up 88s to ambush Allied tanks as they move forward. This is not the same thing. And we'll probably get into this tomorrow a little bit because the unholy trifecta of loser worship certainly includes this. I also don't think I would count the Africa Corps as elite in any sense.
Yeah. Rommel's also one of those figures in history that's there's a lot of myth surrounding him, but he wasn't actually that great of a human being.
Well, and that's kind of like I have spent the past week.
Actually, people said that he wasn't complicit in the Holocaust, and that's actually wrong.
Yes, I spent money. I spent a significant amount of time the past week arguing with neo-Confederates for fun. They're, by the way, idiots. Anyway, I got them within 10 tweets to be reduced to arguing that the word in perpetuity does not mean what we think it means. Anyway, Rommel, there was an attempt to set up an Einsatz group for Africa, which Rommel was aware of and knew. There is no way he was not aware of that. There's no way he was not aware of the Holocaust generally when he was in charge of Hitler's bodyguard.
Of course. Yeah, no, so that's another myth, weeaboo myth, really, about Rommel. There's really, I've studied the Wehrmacht pretty extensively, and there's really no clean thing about it.
There is nothing that I have seen that suggests that the Wehrmacht is anything like it's presented by.
Oh, for sure.
Let's to replace the casualties, and this is the biggest problem. And the same thing you
There's
mentioned before, Sanya, about the C word. About in Ukraine is that every loss for them is a huge loss, whereas for Russia, since they build their own stuff, well, okay, if they lose a couple tanks, they can repair them. Worst case scenario, they build new ones. As long as the crew is alive, this is the most important thing. So
there's a problem with that, significant problem with that. I don't think the crew survival rate is that great.
You have a crew of 3 people.
And the specific reason the crew's survival rate is not that great is because they have a crew of 3 people and they have an entire ring of ammunition sitting under their ass. They're waiting to pop off.
That applies to, unfortunately, Ukrainian tankers.
It does. And Ukrainian's chief model is the T-80 variant, isn't it?
No, their main tank is actually variants of the T-64. The reason why that is because the T-64 was produced in Western Ukraine, actually.
Okay.
So it's a Soviet tank, but it's also a very Ukrainian tank. They have various T-80s, T-72s. What they're getting now, and what is likely to have more of an possible impact due to the number and their familiarity with it, is actually the Polish NATO standardized T-74 variants.
What I think is going to happen, what I think is going to happen largely, like where the Leopards and the Abrams are going to make a difference, is they have significantly better sensors packages.
Yeah, that is true.
That is going to give them, the Ukrainian tankers, superior situational awareness, which is going to dramatically change how Russian troops fight tanks, both Russian tankers and Russian infantry.
Yeah, I don't think, I agree with that, but I don't think it's going to be a game changer, and I think Russians will probably adapt to it.
It'll be a local thing. The adaptation.
It's kind of like when the T-34 first came in, when the Germans encountered it. It wreaked havoc. They pushed through their lines, and they didn't really, for a while, have a strategy to counter it. And of course, they were able to develop, means to do so. Eventually, their own tanks, which were, heavier.
Yeah, the Panzer IV managed pretty well.
Yeah, it did.
Anyway, we've only gone 10 minutes. Let's keep going.
This is why when you see footage of destroyed equipment, it's important to know, has the crew survived or not? The crew, if the tank got hit and the crew leaves, okay, they're going to jump in a new T-72, whatever, and they're going to go back to fight. So this is the real situation. It's a battle of attrition.
I would point out that the equipment is secondary to how the equipment's going to be used. And the biggest mistake the Ukrainians could make is to try and bring to fruition these plans of a grand spring offensive, because it's just not going to work. As I said, the Russians are organized in a density that is virtually impenetrable. They're organized in depth. This isn't September with the thinly spaced lines and no reserves. Russia is prepared. Russia loses this war.
True.
I'm not so sure about that. I think they have a problem, and I think they have a very specific problem in the Kharkiv and the Donbass region. So I sat and I did a lot of reading on Bakhmut for the last couple of weeks, in addition to everything else I'm doing. Niels Puck Anders is a YouTuber on here who does military analysis, and he raised a very interesting point, at least in my mind. So conventional wisdom would suggest that Ukraine should have evacuated Bakhmut and fell back to more defensible positions, particularly as the city is threatened to be encircled. His suggestion, or Niels Puck Anders' suggestion, is that Ukraine neglected to do this because they wanted to continue to attrit Russian forces in Bakhmut. They've also achieved a massive success in that the Wagner group is largely going to be withdrawn. So this has by far been the only really effective unit Russia has had recently. They have been replacing Wagner forces with VDV and naval infantry, and they simply have not been able to achieve the same effect that the Wagner group was prior. The idea is that Ukraine is creating a cauldron in which to attrit Russian forces. I don't necessarily know if that is the option that if I was the Ukrainian commander, I would have taken. However, it makes sense because there has been talk in Russia of commencing an operational pause upon the successful completion of capturing Bakhmut.
Yeah, that's been as of late on the news, and discussed as of late.
If Ukraine has made the calculation that it is better to continue to kill Russians than it is to disengage, then Bakhmut makes a little bit more sense.
It does, yeah. But
the situation around Bakhmut looks bad, but by the same token, the bad situation is only bad insofar as Russia can exploit their advantages, and there's no indication that they can readily do that.
Can I make one statement and caveat to all of this too? That is true, and that's likely their strategy, is to attrit Russian forces in that area, and it is likely working. But they are also suffering very heavily themselves. I read one article today that suggests up to 200 Ukrainian, for 200 in that sector alone being killed or wounded a day, which is for them
a lot. Yes,
a lot. So there is benefit to this attrition strategy, but it goes both ways. And already there is, it's unlikely that Ukraine is going to be mounting, everybody's expecting this massive spring offensive. It's unlikely that it's going to happen in the spring. It's more likely to happen in summer, maybe even towards the fall, because they have suffered extensive attrition.
Well,
One
the other
page
thing,
I want you to, I don't know if I sent it to you over Facebook, but it's it's called Пошук людей під час війни. It's search for people during the war, and it's just families looking for their sons or husbands. And the vast, it's been it's been there since the war started, but every day I'm seeing these people who disappeared, these Ukrainians who are MIA. Not all of them are KIA, but you see the impact that this battle is having, because a lot of these, I would say out of every 4, maybe 3 are from the Bakhmut sector. That's a lot of people being lost in that one area. So it's not, it goes both ways, the attrition.
Sure.
Let's continue and
Yeah, let's keep moving because we again have only made 10 minutes. Let's go.
saying stupid
If it
shit.
turns into a war of attrition. I firmly believe that. I think that at some point in time, by the end of if this war is still going on by the end of this year, the defense industry potential of the West will begin to mobilize. And once the West is able to provide a continuous stream of equipment to Ukraine, Russia's in a world of hurt because now Russia is going to have to, convert to a full-time wartime footing, and that could be a different ball game. We don't know what that outcome will be. Right now, all the advantages accrue to Russia. So Ukraine's best choice, I believe, would be to use these reserves as a fire brigade to defend where necessary, compel the Russians to commit to an offensive in a given area, and then at the moment of the Russian breakthrough, hit them with a counterattack, push them back, pull back, regroup. Don't expend your forces in a futile assault. Use your forces sparingly, commit decisively where necessary, and bleed the Russians down. But they're not going to do that because politically, that's not what Ukraine's tasked to do. Ukraine has been told you need a decisive spring offensive in order for us, the West, to be able to justify to our population why we need to kick our defense industry into a wartime footing. The United States, as I just said, put Ukraine on notice. There is nothing left to give. We've got nothing left to give you. Keep in mind, people are going to go, wait a minute, the United States is big. We're getting ready to fight a war with China. So we have a lot of equipment that has to be earmarked to go to China. We have North Korea acting up. We have a lot of equipment that's earmarked for that. We have Middle East contingencies. So much of the United States military capacity cannot be committed to a conflict in Europe, in Ukraine. So there's a very limited amount of equipment, material, and support that we can provide, and we've pretty much tapped it out. NATO, as I said, is totally dysfunctional. The Germans had to cannibalize brigades to get a battalion sent to their Lithuanian deployment. There's nothing left to cannibalize. They're down to 1 battalion of Leopard A2s, or what, A5s, I guess, A7s. That's it. That's the modern one, A7s. They've got nothing. The French, they've got nothing. Who has anything? The British? You could put the entire British military into a soccer stadium and have 30,000 unsold seats. So, NATO literally has nothing to give. No equipment, no organization. Their air forces don't fly. Don't count all the German aircraft that appear on paper. 60% of them can't get off the ground because they haven't been maintained. They don't have pilots. If they do get
citation needed. Germany has a 20,000-ton frigate, so I don't think you're entirely accurate here.
Get off the ground, Europe has about 2 weeks worth of air-to-air missiles. Why? Because they've never planned for a large-scale combat where you're going to be in continuous air. When was the last time a European fighter shot anything down? When was the last time an American fighter shot anything down? We don't do air-to-air combat. So
I think over Libya,
European forces engaged Libyan forces before they collapsed.
They also, they engaged the various Yugoslav Serb proxy forces.
Yes.
During that happened quite a bit. Even so, though, I'm of the opinion that they haven't had a real test in a long time, and NATO, the vast majority of the pepper, or the fire of NATO is us and maybe the UK.
The theory behind NATO was not that NATO has to prepare to go on the offensive in Russia.
Defensive.
It was always a defensive alliance. So like you see NATO go into Yugoslavia, but that's Yugoslavia, in Bosnia. That's not.
Yeah.
That's not a major offensive. So you don't need that much to defend the way you need the huge army that Russia has to launch offensives. And more to the point, even if NATO doesn't have a force and has forced to sit on the defensive, Russia can't get into Ukraine.
No, it can't.
So there's no significant NATO drawdowns were based on the fact that there was no significant need. And even if they didn't necessarily estimate Russia as weak as it is, that Russia couldn't get a battalion into Lithuania either. So they can barely get battalion tactical groups organized now after calling up 300,000 troops.
Of course.
Like, this is an incredibly one-sided piece of and very unsubstantiated set of facts.
Pardon?
The balloon. They
One
shot
week
down
ago.
the balloon. The
Well,
Chinese.
there you
balloon.
go. We've got some really good balloon guys.
F-22, they had a little balloon sign. They had the first kill of F-22 ever.
Yeah, great. And I mean, our missile to target ratio is pretty good, right? Two $400,000 missiles to shoot down one $20,000 or $2,000 balloon. Take that price ratio every time. No, my point is the West is again. I defer to the commander of all NATO forces in Europe. NATO's not ready for this. They didn't envision it. They can't imagine it. They hadn't imagined it. No NATO country has been putting the resources necessary to prepare for this. They don't have reserves. They don't have ammunition stocks. They don't have fuel stocks. You can't fight a war unless you have the logistics in place. NATO was designed for short, quick duration operations.
Well, that's not
and
true.
this is a long, grinding out war. So I don't see this ending well for the Ukrainians for any number of reasons, corruption, etc. But I will say this again, referring to Prigozhin, the head of Wagner. The Ukrainians ain't cowards. And I mean, you can disagree ideologically with the nationalist units. I do vociferously. You can question the motivation of some of these troops, but when push comes to shove, these guys are fighting. And they're fighting hard. Prigozhin says so. He says these guys have steel cojones. So, let's keep in mind that this is a real war. This isn't a one-sided fight. This isn't Russia rolling over the Ukrainians. This is a bloody battle, street by street, house by house, block by.
That seems to be in contrast to your previously presented position. Just saying. Russia has all the advantages, except Russia doesn't have all the advantages, because they clearly have been being pushed back now for a year. So apparently we're not huffing the coat quite hard enough yet. So I guess you won't get to marry Putin today, Scott.
Block, tree line by tree line, trench by trench. And it's a war that I don't think anybody can imagine. Again, the United States lost. I was in Washington, D.C. last weekend, and I went to the World War II Memorial. And there's a wall with a gold star. And each star represents, 2,000 dead or something like that. And the whole wall is full of stars. It's a little over 300,000 dead for both the European and Pacific campaigns. That's what Ukraine's lost in a year. And people need to chew on that number and understand just how bloody this fighting is.
Scott needs to substantiate that number.
How much more can Russia throw into the war?
Where he's getting these numbers.
I know exactly where he's getting these numbers, but I'm not allowed to say it due to terms of service.
What?
Citation needed.
I can't even honestly,
The Ukrainian army would have had to have been attrited 70%. The Ukrainian army would have been attrited 70% of their surviving force would be all that was left if they had lost 300,000 in a year.
As a fighting force.
They would have no defensive force at this point. You're talking 30% casualties. Military analysis usually gives you're having a very bad day if you've taken 10% casualties.
I still think, when I see the numbers, the Ukrainian general staff, I've shown you that before. Like,
yes.
Put 169 or 180,000, it's approaching 200,000 Russian KIA. That's also complete BS.
There's not going to be an accurate accounting of things probably for a decade after this. 300,000 though is so unrealistic as to be hilariously wrong.
How many? I mean, we can't know, but how many would you say? Do you think that Russia has lost as many troops in this year as we did in Vietnam?
Let me see what Kiev Independent is saying as of today, or yesterday. These estimates are indicative of Russia's combat losses for, let's see what Twitter says. March 26, 170,000, 6,000, almost 7,000 personnel vehicles.
Planes is absolute BS. We've been able to track almost all of the planes.
Yeah, I don't think there's been any. I don't even think they broke 50 planes yet.
You know, I got into an argument with a girl in Ukraine over this, and all she could say was like, you know, well, do you know as much as General Zaluzny? Like, fuck you, bitch. Oh my god.
Zen. I'm imposing Zen on this team speak. 170,000. No. Maybe half that in terms of losses. But even half that would be disastrous for Russia.
Yeah, half that sounds a little too high. I'd say maybe like
half that is being generous, but yes, maybe half of that. There's no 170,000 losses would be almost the force that Russia went into the war with.
yeah.
They have had to reconstitute units, but the line of reconstituting a battalion tactical group for troops is not going to be nearly as much as people are imagining. So like I said, you take 10% casualties and you no longer have a combat effective unit. I'm willing to believe that Russia has had a number of units utterly denuded of effective soldiers, but that's again 1 in 10.
Of course, yeah.
So let's be generous. Let's be generous and say half of that. The vehicles and fuel tanks, that probably is pretty close to accurate. The armored personnel vehicles, maybe. Tanks, I'd say based on what we have seen of Russia mobilizing and modernizing 80-year-old tank models, yes, they're probably losing quite a few tanks. Artillery systems,
probably approaching reality.
Cruise missiles, maybe. That's kind of hard to figure.
Not planes though, not combat fight. Like, you know, they might include drones.
305 is a pretty substantial portion of Russia's air force. Let's. I don't think we can write Russia as 2 anymore. No. Air. Yeah, they're now starting to put readiness estimates for Russia in global firepower. Readiness. So let's say half of Russia's stockpile is ready to fight. 300 planes is unrealistic at the best of times. I don't think Russia has that many pilots that are combat ready.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's keep going.
Like, they have. It feels to me that they did whatever they can based on peacetime capabilities. But how much more can they throw? Like, Ukraine was a surprise to me how much they able to pull out from their reserves. Like they have tanks that they never had. Like it's not supposed to be on paper. They managed to refurbish them. Fighter jets also. I thought the Air Force was gone. Suddenly the Air Force appeared again. So I believe the same will be on the Russian side. But how much more can Russia throw into this war?
Probably
Everything. They're not going to lose. This is a war of existential survival for Russia. But keep in mind that
No, it's not.
It is for Ukraine, you stupid moron.
Russia has mobilized to 1.5 million men. Russia's in the process of expanding.
That's where they got their 1.5 million man article for DPA the other week.
Their military, in addition to supporting the operations in the special military operation. Concurrently, Russia is expanding its military to 1.5 million men, primarily contract soldiers. So
the big difference with the Russian army now compared to before, and I think I forgot to mention it, is that before, since they had this small political objective, the soldiers went in with 6-month contract. So it goes to show how they thought the war would go. But now, if you enter the Russian army, you stay in the Russian army. There's no more contracts, from what I understood. It's a bit like the U.S. soldiers during World War II. Once you enter the U.S. army, you don't leave the U.S. army until the war is over, unless you're dead. But especially, so this is what happened, and this is why the U.S. army was a good fighting force, because you got wounded, you were sent to the rear, and then you were resent to the front once you were fine. So the U.S. army always had a huge pool of manpower. Now the Russian army said, "Okay, we don't do 6-month contract. You sign in and you don't leave, even if you're a volunteer or whatever." So now the Russian army is just getting stronger and stronger. So this is one thing that we have to understand about their vision of the war. They think in years. You know, Prigozhin in his interview said, "Yeah, it's going to last one more year before Donbass is conquered by the Russian army. One more year." And he said, "Oh, if we want to go to the Dnieper, that's 3 years." So it goes to show how far ahead they're planning. Now it's not in days anymore; it's years. So this is very important. And the way I see this war is sort of similar to the US Civil War between the North and the South. Because let's be honest, Ukraine and Russia are very similar in a way, okay? And they have similar ways of doing things. And just like the North and the South during the Civil War. Now, the North had more people and bigger industrial output than the South. And this is a similar situation that we see between Ukraine
There's
and
a very
Russia.
critical difference.
And the South was also supported by the West at the time, by France, by Britain, and all this.
Wrong. Totally wrong. Just so very wrong.
Go ahead, tear them apart.
Oh God, no. So no, that's specific. The Confederacy received absolutely no support whatsoever in any meaningful sense. They were entirely reliant upon their own resources to fight the Civil War. The Union turned around and almost immediately blockades the entire South. There's no way to get into the South. You can't send support. You can't get goods into the Confederacy, let alone an army. You'd have to blast your way to the American Navy to do it. What? Get off the stage. Delete your account. Go. Be gone. Fool. No, there's no support from the West. There's a specific point where there's a political calculation behind Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation that's designed to prevent Great Britain from wanting to support the Confederacy. Like, whatever else you can say about, actually, let's not. Lincoln is probably one of the most brilliant men in American history. He completely outmaneuvered the Confederates at every turn. Just politically crushed them. There's no support. Like, what? I object. You, sir, are a hack. Complete, utter hack.
The East.
I mean,
Yeah, no, it's the East.
I'm sorry, you want to go?
he always says that he's a professional historian, but I don't see any.
You and What If Altis can form yourself a little club, and you can put up dunce caps.
When he says, I'm a historian, it's like, okay, where's your degree? Where's
This is why we need professional certification for historians.
That said, I do like some of his content. I'm not going to dismiss all of it, but we can.
I'm sure it's very sharply put together bullshit.
Yeah,
And this has been a very poor showing. Oh my God.
We'll review his content in some period for sure.
Oh man. Oh Jesus. Oh no. Go away.
But
West is Russia, yeah.
but so yeah, the Confederate forces at the time fought very well as well. It's just that
Not really.
they
No.
expended their resources that they could hardly replace, and it's a very similar situation that we're facing now in Ukraine. And the Union generals, let's be honest, a lot of them were not up to par with their role, they were not the best. Some of them were great, but a lot of them were just average. So yeah, we see the same thing in the Russian army. Some commanders are bad, and you have blunders. So yeah, the Union even had blunders up until the very end. Doesn't mean that it's a sign that it's a defeat, right? So this battle of attrition helps the biggest one, the bigger guy, who can afford these losses.
Okay.
Ukraine,
Let's just take this. Let's take this for a moment and stop. Let's just stop. I'm gonna eat people. Let's just take. Let me find it and email it to myself. Here we go.
What are you doing?
I was having this exact same argument. I was having this exact same argument, like this week with one of those neo-Confederate losers. I need to send. I can't send myself a message. I can send you a message, and then download it on the computer. Yes, the CSA head Bragg, the most mediocre general of the war, who is no longer going to have his own fort. Also, Fort Pickett has been renamed, which is excellent. I want to download my own picture.
Give me one moment. I'll be right back.
Go for it. Okay. Yes, Confederate bases are going to be no longer a thing.
Confederate what?
Confederate bases named after Confederates is going to be no longer a thing, and they are molding. You're okay, Bubba. We'll be done soon.
Let's continue.
Yeah, I'll bring this up in a minute.
it's very hard for them to replace losses. So we keep talking about material losses, but what about their population? How many men are available in Ukraine right now? How many have left? Apparently, they're even handing summons to Ukrainians now abroad. So this is a thing. How many men has Ukraine available? For real? This is the big question. So it's equipment, but also manpower. Can they replace the losses? So this battle of attrition is going to be very complicated.
It's interesting though, because Scott did mention that if NATO decided to really go into a war footing, like it's become really a NATO versus Russia thing.
Okay, we have a nice giant screenshot. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. I'm going to put it up on the screen. Anyway, you have.
I can't see it.
This is from Attaché's video on which side had the better generals. The rate of casualties suffered for battles with which there are statistics. Lee suffered 20.2% casualties, inflicted 15.4% casualties, and total casualties suffered 121,000. Grant, who's widely painted by lost causes as the butcher of the North, suffered casualties 18.1%, inflicted 20.7% casualties, total casualties suffered 94,000. Lee is so massively overblown as a general, and the Confederates generally are horrible commanders, which you know because they lost the war, but we'll talk about that tomorrow.
It's kind of one of those things. If they were so great, why did they lose? Kind of
Pretty
like
much.
Then the entire balance was tipped towards the west, right? Tipped towards
It
Ukraine.
would be like the Korean War, but I think the Americans want to keep that role of just sending equipment. They don't want to particularly fight against a nuclear power because we never know how far it can go. But I think they just want to provide equipment and try to hold the balance like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, yesterday Putin announced the Russia's suspension of the attacking, so to speak, attacking weapons treaty with the United States. And he also said that they are going to prepare for nuclear tests but there was a stipulation if United States conducts tests first. So kind of they exited the treaty, but there's also a stipulation. I would like to comment on the Air Force that Wyatt mentioned, that there is a destruction of the Air Force that has been destructed several times over. Ukraine constantly getting weapons, the older Soviet weapons. The biggest issue for NATO is because Ukraine has Soviet weapons, even starting from shell. It's usually 152 millimeter shells. So they can most of the Soviet weapons use this caliber, so they cannot use 155. If they use 155, they have to get something American, let's say M777 or something else. So there's a huge issue now.
Anyway.
They're running out of all these weapons they can give them. So MiG-29s. There's a lot of MiG-29s you see from other countries. Simply, they were not in Ukraine initially. So I think Ukrainian Air Force suffered a catastrophic defeat. It's been virtually wiped out. But they got a lot of systems from abroad, like from other countries, from Poland, for example. A bunch of MiGs came from other ex-Warsaw countries that still had the older Russian military jets in their armies. So now they're sending them over to Russia. Instead, they're getting American F-16s, and that's another way of profiting on this conflict, is selling all these countries the F-16s and making money. So that's the way it works. That's why you see these numbers of MiG-29s again. Well, how many MiG-29s you destroyed? A lot. No, because they came from all the countries around.
Mm-hmm. And what about the pilots? Are they all Ukrainian? Maybe.
Yeah, because you don't have to retrain. You have.
But the casualties.
Yes, casualties are high, but when the MiG is shut down, pilot has a chance to.
Air Force has done remarkably well. There's no evidence to suggest that they've suffered mass casualties. Just none whatsoever. There's probably an airframe problem, to be sure. There's probably an airframe problem, to be sure.
Yeah.
You just have an escalating number of problems the more you operate a plane, especially these older planes. But let's keep going. Yes, okay. Christ.
Get out, right? So the pilot can survive sometimes. And also they have the schools, they have the instructors, they can train new pilots. They have actual huge ex-Soviet training facilities that are still on Ukrainian territory. One of them actually Russia tried to hit multiple times, but it still stands. So they can train pilots, essentially. They can train more pilots. They can, but the supply of these weapons is going to run out. It's a major problem for Ukrainian military. So they will need to switch over to these new types of weapons that they don't have any production facilities for. It's a huge logistical issue.
Yeah,
can the West still continue to support Ukraine after year 2? Because this year I know the West or NATO can continue to support Ukraine, but after this year, after the next year, that means 2 years into the war, after the second year, can the West and NATO still continue to support Ukraine? What do you guys think?
They're already committed to it.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
president of the United States yesterday. So right after Putin's speech, he said, "Well, we're going to support Ukraine no matter how long. We just go until re-election, at least until re-election 2024. Then something might change. If Trump comes back, maybe he'll be okay. Guys, stop. Let's sit down, finish the war in one day."
Yeah.
But until then, 2024 for sure. 2023, 2024 until elections end of the year.
They're going to be in here for a while. That means.
I don't know. A Biden administration official just told the Ukrainians that what Joe Biden said was a whole bunch of bunk. The United States has nothing left to give them.
Force needed.
So, no. we can't support into year 2 unless we mobilize our industries, and no democratic, based country is going to go through a wartime mobilization when they're not at war. Germany's not going to go on a wartime mobilization. France isn't going to go on a wartime mobilization. Both their economies are hurting. The United States isn't going to go on a wartime mobilization. And even if they did, how long does it take to do that? This isn't instantaneous. We don't have, dormant industrial production lines just waiting for the switch to be turned on. If you want to double production, you have to build from scratch a new production line. You have to train people, but first you have to get Congress to allocate the money. That's a fight. There's no guarantee. No, I don't think that this war is sustainable into a second year under the current conditions. There's nothing left to give them. There's literally nothing out there.
From an economic,
next year at least.
There's no indication that anything he has said is correct. There's absolutely zero indication of that. More to the point, historically speaking, any country that wants to go to war and sell people weapons has been able to do so quite right. So there's very little indication that even if this is wishful thinking at its finest.
An economic perspective, honestly, I don't know if the US can continue. I don't have the numbers or anything. But let's talk from the moral points, like ideological points. In the West, they have told that the Russian army is fleeing. I remember reading articles from all over Europe in the West in September, October. The Russian army is fleeing. They're going to leave Ukraine. The Russian army is destroyed. They
No
have
one
so many
said that.
casualties. Okay. But the people will see
I
the
see
truth
some
eventually.
ridiculous
They'll be
stuff,
like,
though.
how
I'm
come?
not gonna lie to you. I mean, in terms of like Western media, Russia's suffering catastrophic, like absolute BS.
I saw not a single
They
article.
overblow what Russia's suffering and actually make a much more hopeful picture than is really there. So I don't know. I agree. I mean, to an extent, I agree. I don't know. The media's coverage of this war has been absolute dog crap.
Anyway. No one has said that Russia's leaving Ukraine. They have pointed out when Russia has retreated. They have not pointed out that Russia's going to save Ukraine, leave Ukraine. None of that is really anything I have seen at all. They have certainly gave reports. They have given reports that are overly optimistic, sure, but that's not the same thing as saying that they're winning or who's winning or losing. So, yeah, that's nonsense.
We're still talking about it. Was there a lie?
Citation needed.
And I think this is also one thing of the entire equation is that, yeah, they give us these stories, but people will be like, okay, if the Russian army is really so bad, so destroyed, how come they're advancing right now? How come it's not over? They will have an explanation.
They haven't been advancing in any significant way. They've gained kilometers. They've expended thousands of lives for kilometers of territory in the past month.
For this, they will need to explain. For me, that's the big thing, and the bubble might just burst at one point.
I think your bubble.
All right, gentlemen. On that note, I have to run. Unfortunately, I'm on a short tether, and I have another obligation. But thank you very much, Wyatt, for the invitation. Sanya, it's a pleasure.
Thank you for joining.
History Legends. Thank you very much, and
Pleasure.
let's do it again sometime.
All right. Thank you so much.
Please
Okay.
don't.
Thank you.
Oh, he's gone.
Oh, it's
So, actually, I have one more question. Only one last question, but he left. Actually, it's just a quick prediction of what will happen over the next 365 days.
No, this is the worst question because we always get it wrong. Like, honestly.
Yeah.
It would
So
help.
that's why it's supposed to be
It would help you in not getting it wrong if you had some actual relevant subject material knowledge.
a quick one. It's not.
This is a way to get roasted.
I'm doing just fine without you answering this question.
You know,
Yeah,
when
but
you
I think
say,
so.
"Oh, something is gonna happen,"
You said.
oh,
Yeah.
something
I think-
is gonna happen, and then nothing happens. You look like a fool. Like,
I think.
No.
Scott
You look like a
kind
fool
of said
now.
Already, he said that he cannot see the West or America to able to sustain this support for this year. Just the second year, they don't. He kind of already predicted, the West cannot support this, which means that there will be a collapse. I think he also mentioned about how by summer, the Russians will start to roll over the Ukrainian military. So
Well, you said
what
that
do you
about
guys
the
think?
winter too. We also thought that every commentator was, Russian offensive in the winter is gonna start now, and then you wait. Oh, it's gonna start that day. No, actually, it's gonna start when he does.
The Russian offensive was in full swing when you were saying this, you clown. What is wrong with these people?
His speech. Oh, on the 24th of February for the anniversary, and then you always push and you wait. So
Yeah, that's what I tell my viewers. I say they always ask me, though, when is the winter offensive? I said, now you're looking at the winter offensive. What are you talking about? This is the winter
Yes, it sucked. It was bad. Did not achieve its objectives.
offensive. Now, how much more you want to expect, to happen?
But I do think that Bakhmut is the focal point of the war. This is why my YouTube channel is almost obsessed about the battle, because I just see the numbers of troops deployed there. We haven't seen such a huge battle like that since a long time. Like the intensity of a battle, I would say World War II almost in terms of intensity. So it's a very important battle.
That's a stretch.
Ukraine has shown that they don't want to give it up, and because they made a commitment. So it reminds me of Stalingrad. But they have sent.
It's kind of. Would you place its intensity?
They have sent a lot of.
Real quick. Would you place the intensity of this? I mean, it's very intense. That's obvious. But in terms of the size of the forces involved, you're looking at kind of a regimental-sized battle, right? It's not a division-sized battle. It's not.
You don't have enough space to put mass formations in the Bakhmut pocket.
No, you don't. And he's talking about since World War II. That's a really. I mean, look at some of the battles that have occurred since World War II. There's been very big battles. I mean, look at the battles of the Sinai or in the Golan Heights.
Yeah, intensity is kind of a fuzzy word to use here, so you can kind of walk around it.
It's not the right word to use, because any battle's intense. You could be in a police shootout, and it can be extremely intense.
Super intense, dude. Yeah, that's like scale. We're talking about a measure of scale here.
Yeah. Bakhmut is not World War II scale, not even close.
No.
Especially not World War II Eastern Front scale. It's not even Korean War scale.
Right. This is a large war. These are large operations that were not necessarily envisioned before. However, this is not anywhere close to the same scale. And comparing via scale, is it possible? I think comparing certain broad topics is. But this is not it. This is not a very.
The Iran-Iraq war, in terms of mass.
Yes.
You're talking of very, very large battles. So this isn't. I don't know. He's full of.
I mean, at best he requires qualifiers. At worst, he requires an education.
Troops, and they still keep sending a lot of troops. Now they face Wagner alone. Apparently, Prigozhin said they're alone. Is it true? I don't know. Probably Sanya has more intel on everything what's going on this side, so I'll let you talk. But there's a lot of battles in the way before we can say what's going to happen. Like it's still volatile.
Sanya, any idea what happening between Wagner and the Russian military?
There's a conflict going on. So, and the conflict source is the competition between Ministry of Defense forces and the Wagner forces, because essentially they're part of the same pie. They get in pieces of the pie in terms of weapons and supplies, and of course they have to compete with each other. And now there's an open conflict that actually spilled into the battlefield. Prigozhin, according to Prigozhin himself, he said that his troops have been cut off from the shell supply. They're not getting. They're getting only 20% of what they are asking to continue conducting operations, because the shell expenditures are huge. This is how they conduct the war. They send the first echelon of troops to the battlefield. They determine where the Ukrainian defense is and just cover them with massive bombardment. And they need a lot of shells to continue. Now they've been cut off, and he's saying that the instigators of this cutoff are the top generals in the army. Essentially, it's the Shoigu with the Minister of Defense. Is the guy who's basically not signing the orders to supply the weapons to them, and he's saying that on paper, the Wagner troops don't exist. They've been always supplied under a mysterious, non-existent troops, because in Russian law, the actual mercenary is outlawed still. It's not legal, if you believe it or not. But still, they have a huge private army that's conducting a war. So the conflict became, just the last 2 days, became very heated, with Prigozhin just recording the messages saying that I don't get no shells. We're out of shells. Our casualties are 5 times more. And he actually posted a picture of killed Wagner soldiers, the entire field. You can see it on his channel. This is all coming not from some Ukrainian little telegram. No, it's coming from his official Telegram channel. So he's saying there are huge problems. And I think that nobody can win Russia except for Russia itself. They start fighting with each other like this. If the conflict continues to grow and escalate between the Wagner and military defense, nothing good comes out of it. They're never going to capture Bakhmut. The offensive is going to stop, and it's going to stall, and it's going to roll back. So it's this whole war is so dynamic. It's impossible to predict what happens in a month. And we're not going to do that. But what I can guarantee you is going to be very interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting to watch it, because this is just changes so fast and so dynamic. And there's nothing in the world that attracts more interest, except for the Russian audience, for sure. I don't know. Maybe in the United States, this kind of conflict goes a little bit lower with time, but then it comes back up again and kind of goes low, because there's many news, like Ohio disaster comes on top, etc. But this is the thought. There's a huge conflict. It's not straight up. It's not a straight line. It's essentially a lot of moving parts, and it's impossible to predict, guys. It's impossible.
Endure for 10 seconds.
All right. So thank you everyone for participating, and of course thank you to Scott for joining, because he have to leave, because I.
Okay, if Sanya's account hadn't already been deleted, he should do it. You're a disgrace. That was actually almost a good hosting of a panel, even if it was a horribly assembled panel. We're gonna call it here. Tomorrow we are gonna be back. A much more regular, sedate show, talking about the loser trifecta of Russia, Confederate worship, and Wehrmacht worship. We're also next week going to sit, and I'm going to make Hetman here endure a What If Autist video in revenge for me having to endure this. And we should have one other show at the very least. And I'm going to continue writing essay scripts. I want to thank everybody for coming out.